A good Erev Shabbos, everyone. Erev Shabbos, Parshas Shelach. It's hard to find words to describe this past week. You can call it a difficult week. You can call it a week of terrible tragedies. Or you can call it another week in the life of Klal Yisrael. I'll tell you why I say that. If you take a look at the beginning of the parasha, the opening line of the parasha, so God turns to Moshe and says, Shlach lecha anoshim, send for yourself spies, anoshim, people. So the commentaries all say interesting things. Rashi says that what's the connection between last week's parasha with the story of Miriam, the Lashon Hara of Miriam, and this week's parasha, the story of the Meraglim, that the Meraglim didn't understand, they didn't get the message of the story of Miriam, and that's why they committed the crime that they committed, why they spoke Lashon Hara about the land. They didn't understand how terrible Lashon Hara was, and then extrapolate that to their lives and say that, we can't speak Lashon Hara about the land, and because of that they were punished. The Baal HaTurim, who alludes to that also, but the Baal HaTurim looks at those first three words, and he says, if you take a look at the last letters of those words, Shlach lecha anoshim, so ches, chof, and mem, Shlach lecha anoshim, spells the word chacham. That's what they should have been, that's what they weren't. And that's why the terrible tragedy happened. There was something lacking in chachma. Hard to understand that if they weren't so able to extrapolate and to make connections with things, okay, so they were a little bit obtuse. They weren't the smartest guys in the world. Okay, that doesn't make them not good leaders. It doesn't make them good people. A lot of times you speak to another person and they're nice people, they're wonderful people, but they don't get it. They can't make connections. They can't put pieces together, and that's why they have teachers and rabbis, and that's why they have friends, and that's why they have spouses. Because their spouses tell them, what's the matter with you? This happened the last time, this is happening now. You see a pattern in your life, see what's going on. Oh yeah, okay, thank you. Not everybody has that as a natural ability. So we're going to call these guys, these Meraglim, we're call them Rashayim, we're going to call them wicked guys because of that? Because they were missing a little bit of chachma, they were missing a little bit of intelligence? So I'll tell you what I think is an incredible thing. There's really two ways to look at the world. You look at the world like a regular person. And like a regular person, you see teva, you see nature. You see there's a certain order to life, there's certain predictability in life, and every time something goes out of that order, it's called a miracle. And you're able to recognize those miracles. You're able to look at that and to be able to see this is not normal. That the hospital was, they pulled all the people out. It was evacuated that floor of the hospital that suffered a direct hit. The tragedy could have been so much greater. It's a nes, it's a mamish miracle. And that's the way you live. It's a good life. It's a holy life. To be able to recognize God's hand in things. But there's another level. And that's the level that's ultimately demanded of every Jew. To get the level of a chacham, to get to the level of a wise person, and who recognizes that there's chacham in everything that happens, and that everything is part of teva, everything is part of nature. Meaning that there's nothing that's supernatural, it's all part of nature. Because that's the way God deals with his world. God deals with his world beyond nature. If you want to see it that way, you'll be able to recognize that everything is miraculous. Everything is stupendous. Everything is incredible. There is nothing normal that's going on in our lives. That's really the way that a person who lives recognizes that Teva is nothing more than Elokim. It's nothing more than God. And therefore, when things follow a predictability or go against predictability, it's all unpredictable because it's all ultimately coming from God. The gematria of the word Teva and the word Elokim, it's the same 86. It's fascinating. The two names of God. Elokim is Midas Adin, it's the attribute of justice, the attribute of predictability. Yud Kei Vav Kei, the name of Hashem. That's the attribute of Rachamim, of mercy. Of mercy is a world where there's constantly adjustments, where God is constantly adjusting things to work the way that he needs it to work. Nothing is predictable. And that's where we have to live our lives. We recognize that there's nothing predictable. That's what Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said to his child. He saw his child on a Friday afternoon right before Shabbos crying, and he said to his daughter, "Why are you crying?" So she said, "I did something silly. I got so mixed up, I lit vinegar instead of oil." So he looks at her and says, "Amarle Biti," he says, "My daughter, Ma yichbaslach, what are you getting so upset for? Misha Amarle Shemen v'yadlik, the one who says that oil should burn, hu yarmel chametz v'yadlik. He can just as easily say to vinegar that it should burn." That we understand. And what happened was that it actually lit, and it burnt the entire Shabbos, and they used it even for Havdalah. Because there's no teva, there's no nature. Everything that's happening is stupendous. Everything that's happening is outside of nature. Everything that's happening is incredible. There is no norm. And that's the chacham. The regular person lives that, you know what, this is the norm and this is outside of the norm. And there's a faith to that. There's a beauty to that. But the chacham, the person who really understands and has a relationship with God and recognizes that he's living in God's world, is understanding that nothing that is happening normal. If the Ramban says this is where we have to get to. We mention the big miracles so that we can get ourselves to a place that we recognize that everything in the world is miraculous. The fact that I woke up this morning, we can't just say, "Moida'ani lefanecha." It is a miracle. The fact that you're in my life is a miracle. The fact that I have the ability to do the things I'm doing is a miracle. The fact that I can talk on a screen over here in Eretz Yisrael and you can hear me in America, that is a miracle. The fact that I have the ability to be able to teach Torah in my life, that's a miracle. Nothing is normal. And everything is normal. Because everything is really ultimately the Ratzon HaBorei. And when you start to recognize that, you start to realize that you're on a path. And that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is leading you down that path. And that everything is part of that path and part of that process. And that was the Taina of the Meraglim. The Meraglim looked at the event of Miriam and they saw what happened with Miriam and with the Lashon Hara and what happened to her, and the whole Jewish people had to stand there and wait for her to get healed. And they saw it was an incredible event, but it was a unique event. It was a special event. It wasn't part of a path. It wasn't part of a system. And therefore it was disconnected in their mind. And you know what? When we listen to people that just don't get it, it's frustrating. Because there are certain basic things that a person has to recognize, that this leads to that, and this has a ramification, and this is the reason why that's happening. Ezu Chacham was a wise person, the person is able to recognize that there are ramifications to what you do, and a person who lives clueless, it's not a good thing. But a person who lives so clueless, when they're expected to be able to see, they're supposed to be on a level that they're supposed to be able to recognize at least the simplest kind of connections. And the connection between what happened to Miriam and what they were experiencing is not 50 miles. The connection is a close connection. And they were special anoshim. These were beautiful human beings. They were expected to be able to live on that level. And to be able to see those connections of Teva and Elokim, of nature and God, and recognize that this is all coming from God. And therefore I have to deal with this and treat this in a different way. That's the Cheder Meraglim. Not that they were a little obtuse, but that they were expected to have, and they had that ability to be able to live on a deeper level. That's what's expected of us. We're in the middle of this turmoil now. We think that strange things are going on. No, nothing's strange. Everything is life, because life is strange. The stranger it becomes, the more you realize that it's all coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A Yid that's not looking at this now and recognizing that we are in Ikvus of the Mashiach, that we are in the footsteps of Messiah, Whether that means we're at the first footstep or at the last footstep, how in the world am I supposed to know? I don't get paid enough money to do that. But I know that we're on the path. I know that this is connected. It's going somewhere. This is not just regular. There's crazy things going on. There are painful things going on. No one says they're not painful. No one says that death and destruction, direct hits from missiles that can split into smaller, devastating missiles. No one says it's not crazy. It's not difficult. It's not painful. But reality is painful. It doesn't change the reality. This is all miraculous, but miraculous is nature. Miraculous is reality. Everything is miraculous. Because everything is from the Yad Hashem. Shlach l'cha anoshim. Be a chacham. Live life deeper. Recognize that there is a purpose and a plan to every single thing that's going on in our lives. Perhaps a painful plan, but plan. Be smart. Parshas Shelach, right in the middle of this war, is a jolt, a reminder. Shlach l'cha anoshim. Be a chacham. Have a beautiful, amazing, insightful, and illuminating Shabbos.